Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I am talking about Trials of the Jedi, written by Charles Soule. Oh my gosh, it is finally time to talk about this book. This is the final adult novel in the High Republic Phase 3, which is signaling the end of the High Republic novels. So going into this book, I was nervous because we had so much ground to cover. We had so many things that needed tying up. I trusted that Charles Soule would do a good job with it because he did such a great job kicking off the High Republic with Light of the Jedi, but I still was nervous going into it just because of how much we still had unanswered by the time that we got to this book. I do have to say, without giving away any spoilers quite yet, I do have to say a lot of the characters that I really cared about, their story did wrap up to have a satisfying ending for me. There were a couple of other storylines that I found not quite so satisfying. So I felt like it did end up balancing out. Some of it was very satisfying. Some of it is not really like what I would have imagined or chosen. Overall, I did enjoy the book. I did enjoy the conclusion to the High Republic. Even though I didn't get every single thing I wanted, I'm still really glad that I read it. This book follows a group of Jedi, characters that we already know and love from many other High Republic books, that return to Planet X to bring the Nameless back to their home. This is something that has been built up and foreshadowed in previous High Republic books, especially the concept of the Nameless needing to go back to Planet X in order to handle this whole problem. So I'm really glad that we got to see that happen. It was very fitting that it happened in the last book of the High Republic, even though I was at first a little confused, and I guess I still kind of am, a little confused about why we had another book in between when they learned about having to go back to Planet X in Tears of the Nameless until we got to this book. I loved Into the Light, but I was kind of like, why was that not an immediate priority to go straight back to Planet X? But in this book, we go back to Planet X. We address some things there. That is what I wanted. So I did eventually get what I wanted. I just had to wait a book longer than I originally thought that I would have to wait. And the High Republic, to be fair, has at times been a mixed bag for me. Like, there's been times that I have loved it so much, and there's been times that I've been frustrated with certain parts of the High Republic, but what ultimately kept me coming back was my love for the characters and the characters that the High Republic authors, they made me fall in love with them. So even though I had my highs and lows with this series, I was really, really invested in wanting to see what became of these characters that I've spent so much time with. So if you've been following the High Republic and you've been considering reading this book, I would call it a must read. Don't you want to know how this all ends? At this point, I am going to start talking spoilers. So if you haven't read this book yet, if you don't want any spoilers, now is your time to turn back. So we open this book with Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss together. They are still in a relationship and they receive a notice that there are some Jedi that are being asked to go on a mission. At the beginning of the book, they don't know what the mission is. All they can tell is that they're probably expecting a lot of people to die on this mission, which is why it's not a requirement to go. You can say no if you don't want to go. And what we as the reader quickly find out is that this is the mission to Planet X that was teased in the synopsis of the book. And the council reveals that they have the Rod of Ages, which has already been established as a way to control the Nameless. If you have the Rod of Ages, then you can basically tell the Nameless what to do and they listen to you. Also, they have 12 Nameless that they have captured. In addition to that, they also have the ore from Tollus, which is something that was covered in Tears of the Nameless, where Reith Silas and his former master Comac were able to retrieve an important metal ore from the planet of Tollus that is resistant to the effects of the blight. What they're doing with that ore is they are making suits of armor, which the theory is that they will also be able to resist the effects of the Nameless, since it's already been established that the Nameless and the blight are connected. Basically, if something seems like it can resist the blight, then it also should probably be able to resist the effects of the Nameless. So we do have a very Fellowship of the Ring type situation where we have 9 Jedi that are chosen, And these 9 Jedi are characters that we have been following for a very long time. So, of course, as the reader, we're automatically invested. They are going to go to Planet X and return the Nameless to their home world. We also get some other information, either we're reminded of, or it is revealed to us, or it is revealed to other characters. Such as we are reminded that the key to destroying the storm wall is destroying the Gaze Electric, which is Marchion Ro's ship. We also have Elzar Mann admits to Lena So that the blight is in the Jedi Temple. And the reason he tells her this eventually is because she's trying to decide if she should take Marchion Ro's advice on how to get rid of the blight. At the end of Temptation of the Force, he showed up and said, I know how to get rid of the blight. I can help you. And she's trying to decide if she's going to actually take him up on that or not. And that's when Elzar Mann gives her the information of, by the way, the blight is in the Jedi Temple. So, of course, she's mad that she wasn't told previously. And she feels like the Jedi being like, oh, yeah, we can handle it. Like, we've got it under control. It's not spreading. We've got it contained. She feels like that's kind of just like not fair, which I mean, I kind of agree with. Like, I get why she's mad. Something that's interesting about Lena So, though, that I feel like we really see in this book, Lena So and Marchion Ro, they are kind of two sides of the same coin. The thing that made me really clear on that in this book is that there's a part where Lena So is like, I just need one more great work. That needs to be my legacy, is all these great works that I did, and then everyone's going to remember me. And it's very similar sounding to Marchion Ro, who he wants everyone to remember him. He wants to have an impact, but he's doing that by destroying things instead of building things. So, very similar thought processes between the two of them, but they think that different things are going to get them this legacy that they want. But Lena So does come to the decision that she is not going to take Marchion Ro up on his offer. She tells him no, and he's enraged and also pretty surprised. Like, he thought that he had this in the bag, and it turns out he does not. As the Jedi are getting ready for their mission to Planet X, there's a couple of mishaps that occur. So, something that happens is that Reith is testing out the armor, and when he's doing that, he tries to connect with the Nameless through the Force, partially because he's testing how it's going to affect him, and also partially because he really just like feels the need to try to connect with them while he has the opportunity. And that goes really poorly. He's pretty much overwhelmed with a sense of pain and suffering, and it's just like so intense that it pretty much knocks him on his butt and scares the crap out of everybody. And that is a hint that the Nameless are suffering and they're victims, which that's something that's been mentioned and hinted at and shown to us multiple times already. So from very early on in this book, we do get the sense that that's going to be a major theme, which eventually it does turn out to be. Something else that happens as they're preparing for this mission is that a Nameless gets loose and eats a non-force sensitive worker. So that's another thing that gets everybody all freaked out because, first of all, they're not supposed to do that to everybody's knowledge. Although, us as the reader, we know that they've done this before. And they're like, okay, well, now we need to like reformat how we're doing this because we don't want to be putting regular people that are not Jedi or not part of the military. We don't want to be putting those people in danger of the Nameless. And when that happens, the Nameless gets away, eats the non-sensitive person, and also really injures Arkoff. So Arkoff is a character from the Edge of Balance manga series, which I love. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of the High Republic, and I love Arkoff. And the Nameless injures his leg so bad that Torben Buck has to immediately amputate Arkoff's leg, like at the scene. That was horrible, and now Arkoff is not able to go on the mission anymore. After all that happens, the 9 that we are left with who actually end up going on the mission is Reith Silas, Buryaga, Belle Zettifar, Torben Buck, Ty Yorick, Elzar Mann, Avar Chris, Tarek, and Aslan Rel. Couple of things to add. So Ty Yorick is not a Jedi anymore, but she is a Force sensitive and she is a very skilled animal handler slash monster hunter. I really loved getting to spend time with Ty Yorick in this book because she does this really cool thing where she really tries to work with the animals, like even if it's a quote unquote monster, She really tries to work with the animals and understand what exactly it is the animal wants or needs and address the problem that way first. And she only kills the monsters as like a last resort. So I really, really liked her character and I loved getting to see her thought process as she's working with the nameless throughout the story. So that was a really cool part. So I'm glad she was included in the nine. We also have Torben Buck, who was a medic, also known by the ridiculous nickname of Buckets of Blood. So if you've read the comics and been keeping up with that, you've definitely heard of Buckets of Blood before. But he is does not view himself as a soldier. He really views himself as a medic, but he also understands that his presence is really needed, so he does go on the mission. Tarek is also a character from the comics, primarily, who is a force bond twin. So Tarek's twin is named Sarit, and they are on Coruscant while Tarek is on the mission. So they are able to communicate psychically in their minds, even though Tarek is really, really far away from Sarit. So for a big portion of the mission, Tarek is pretty much their main communication to Coruscant. And then, much to my dismay, we also have Aslan Rel, who Aslan Rel has been getting on my nerves for a while now. I feel like kind of let down by this character. I thought that he was going to contribute a lot more than he actually ended up contributing. And I mean throughout the High Republic, not even just in this book. I just thought we would see more from him. But he is one of the nine because of his unique knowledge about the Nameless and also just the fact that he is a pretty powerful force user. I mean, whether you like the whole dark side thing or not, that is just the facts of the matter. So he does end up going on the mission. Something that surprised a lot of the Jedi is that Vernestra Rowe was not part of the original nine. And she was pretty bummed out by this and frustrated because she was given the information about how to get to Planet X in a Force vision by Mari Santeca. Vernestra thought that that information would mean more to the Jedi than it seems to mean at the beginning of this book. So she is visibly frustrated by the fact that she's not in the nine. But one thing that is explained to her by the Jedi Council is that she is part of the backup mission for if the first mission fails or if anything goes wrong and they need to send someone else in. She is part of that like runner up group. Something that drove me absolutely crazy is that Belle Zettifar leaves Ember, his dog, with Indira Stokes back on Coruscant for Ember's safety. However, once they are on their way to Planet X in the process of crash landing on the planet, it turns out that Ember was actually stowed away on the ship the whole time. So, worst pet sitter ever is Indira Stokes. Absolutely not. I would be so angry if I was Belle Zettifar. I'm just gonna say right now, for anybody who is anything like me, I'm gonna put you out of your misery right now and tell you that Ember does end up being okay. Ember does not die on the mission, thank God. So they crash land on Planet X. They survive the crash landing. However, unfortunately, Marchion Rowe has figured out what they're doing. Basically, he just put the pieces together and he is also there. So all the nameless, including the ones that Marchion Rowe brought, all go to Marchion Rowe because he has the Rod of Power, which is kind of like the counteractive to the Rod of Ages. And the Rod of Ages is still on the ship, but they misplaced it in the ship during the crash landing, so they can't get to it immediately. So Marchion starts off with the upper hand. Something that happens while they are having a confrontation with Marchion Rowe is that he destroys the Gaze Electric. And when he actually does this, I don't feel like the reader is told with like 100% certainty exactly why he did it. However, what I put together is that the reason he destroyed the Gaze Electric is so the Republic would be too occupied with that to be able to like actually send anyone to Planet X or even realize what was happening on Planet X. It's possible that you might have gotten something different from his reasoning behind that, but that is what I put together because I didn't really see any other reason as to why he would deliberately strand himself on Planet X like forever. That does set off a chain of events on the other side of the galaxy on Iridu. There was an uprising against the Nihil already underway before Marchion Road destroyed the storm wall, But what he did is he pretty much just doomed all of the Nihil and General Vice who were fighting that uprising because once the storm wall went down, the Republic was immediately already on the other side of the storm wall waiting for this moment. So they all just went straight to Iridu and just completely destroyed the Nihil, destroy General Vice's fleet, all of that. So the Nihil are pretty much done. And we also find out that Porter Ingle was also on Iridu. He is also fighting in the uprising, and him and General Vice finally have their long awaited for conclusion to their rivalry. This is one of the parts of this book that I personally found to be such a satisfying resolution to their conflict because Porter and Vice are fighting each other. Porter recognizes that he is a better fighter than Vice, and he's the one that kept letting her get away instead of just finishing her off. And he has to admit to himself that the reason that he was doing this is because there was a part of him that was still holding on to the fact that she seemed to know where Barash, his sister, was. And that is something that he was afraid to lose. He kept letting her getting away and just kept prolonging this issue between the two of them because killing Vice would mean there's no longer any possibility of him ever finding Barash. But something that I absolutely loved is that when Porter and Vice are having their final confrontation, he tells her, I don't need you to tell me where Barash is. I'm ready to let go of this. I mean, clearly Barash doesn't want to be found. And he kills Vice finally. And he's just finally ready to let go of the possibility of Vice telling him where Barash is, also recognizing the fact that she probably wasn't even actually going to tell him anyway. So, absolutely loved how it ended between Porter and General Vice. And I loved it that Porter was finally able to find peace with something that has just been weighing on him for decades and decades and decades. So meanwhile, on Planet X, while the Nihil are being completely destroyed, unfortunately the Nameless are all being completely destroyed as Marchion is using the Rod of Power to direct them to kill each other. And this is something that's a huge problem because part of the Jedi going to the trouble of bringing the Nameless to Planet X means that for everything to be resolved and for the blight to be put back in balance and all of that, the Nameless had to return to their home world safe and sound. They couldn't be killed because if they're killed, then it's basically just making the blight worse. And that is something that they see the results of on Coruscant as this is happening because as Marchion Ro is killing all of the Nameless, the blight on Coruscant under the Jedi Temple immediately expands. The Jedi are trying to help the Nameless that Marchion Ro is going after, but they do kind of have a hard time controlling them because of, at the end of the day, it's still Jedi and Nameless. Like, they really don't know what they're doing. And unfortunately, in that scene, Torben Buck does end up getting killed by a Nameless. So that was a huge bummer because I really liked Torben Buck and I'm really sad that he is the casualty from this mission. He's actually the only casualty from the mission. So, I mean, at least that's good that, not everybody died, which was one of my fears going into this book. I wasn't going to be happy if that happened. But, he is unfortunately the character that we lost, so that sucks. One thing that this book does that I'm really not I personally just kind of honestly don't accept is that when it is being explained how the blight works, it describes the blight as shrinking the force. There is a quote that says, "This should have been impossible. The force was infinite, and yet it was happening." This line is kind of tough for me to accept as a Star Wars fan because of just the way that I interpret what the Force is based on how it's been described in movies and other books. I just don't accept that it's possible to actually shrink the Force. So I am choosing to interpret this line as more metaphorical, like it felt like the Force was shrinking, not that it literally was. And regardless of which way Charles Soule meant it, that is the way I'm interpreting it because in my definition of the Force that I've gathered, I don't think that that's possible to shrink the Force. So I just am not going with that. I did want to address that line because I could see that line being troublesome for some Star Wars fans. I think if that's not how you interpret the Force working based on your own understanding of Star Wars canon and Star Wars lore, then I think you just don't have to go with that. I mean, I certainly am not taking that as an actual explanation of how the Force works. I'm taking that as a metaphor. After Marchion Ro's carnage of the Nameless, they do all end up splitting up. Belle, Ember, and Buriaga follow Marchion Ro. Avar and Elzar follow the last surviving Nameless that survived this whole carnage, and Reeth and Ty York are following Aslan Rel, who ran off into the forest. Again, I find myself asking, why is Aslan Rel here? He is too much of a risk, but that is what happened. And this confrontation between Bel Zettifar and Marchion Ro, pure perfection. I loved it so much. We even get a what I am choosing to interpret as a Loden Great Storm Force Ghost. Of course, the word Force Ghost is not used because at this time in Jedi history, the Force Ghost thing wasn't really as common as it is by the time we get to the original trilogy because of Qui-Gon and Yoda figuring out how to do it and all of that stuff. So the word Force Ghost is not used. However, to me, I took this as Loden's Force Ghost shows up during his confrontation with Marchion Ro to encourage him, give him strength, help him do what needs to be done. This whole scene is just perfection. The way that Belle and Marchion handle each other, the way that Belle wins that fight between the two of them, perfection. Like, oh my gosh, that is seriously the moment that I have been waiting for. And the last thing that Marchion Ro sees before he goes unconscious is Belle holding Loden's lightsaber. Seriously, cannot say enough good things about that scene. The whole time I was reading that scene, I was just like, this is so perfect. I think at least for myself and like most people that I know, we were all wanting Belle Zettifar to be the one to get Marchion Ro in the end, and I am so glad that that's the way it ended up happening. However, Belle does not kill Marchion Ro, but the unconscious Marchion Ro is taken into custody and later goes on trial, and he gets handled. He gets what's coming to him. Aslan Rel, Reeth, Silas, and Ty York, what they end up doing is they find this weird force vortex thingy that a bunch of Nameless are all around, like the Nameless that actually live on planet X. What they end up doing is they use the Rod of Ages because they finally do get a hold of that in that whole scene with the all the Nameless getting killed and all of that. They do finally get a hold of the Rod of Ages, and what they do is they use the Rod of Ages to counteract the Rod of Power, which does end up destroying the Rod of Power. And then when Avar and Elzar end up going to follow that final Nameless, they end up in a really weird situation where pretty much everything finally gets explained. The best way that I can describe what they end up in is kind of like that force cave that Luke goes into on Dagobah when he sees all those visions and all that. It was kind of like that. That's like the best way that I can describe it. And at the end of the force cave is an actual Nameless, but it's not like a regular Nameless. It's kind of like a spiritually like powerful, like almost like a supernatural entity of a Nameless. And this entity reveals to them that the Nameless are sentient. They're actually not even animals, they actually are people. So that was a huge bummer. And the reason that they were doing everything that they were doing is because they were driven to madness by Marchion Ro. And this is like a huge crime against not humanity because they're not humans, but you know what I'm saying. Huge crime that has occurred. The Nihil, of course, were like the main perpetrators of it, but the Jedi really did not help the situation. And the role of the Nameless on Planet X is because Planet X is such a strong vergence of the Force, they help keep that in balance. And when it spins out of control, then the blight happens and it spreads to all these other planets. So the Nameless being on this planet is a huge part of keeping this vergence like in balance and staying how it needs to be. So, sounds like that's where later on we do get that force prophecy that we get, in prequel era. Unfortunately, the amount of time it takes for more Nameless to be born in order to get this planet back stabilized it's going to take too long. So Avar and Elzar end up staying behind in order to hold the planet in balance. And the two of them are actually like not going to be able to continue the lives that they were having. They're pretty much going to be constantly in meditation, holding this planet in balance. And Avar is going to be the light side, and Elzar is going to be the dark side. So that is like the tragedy of Elzar Man is that he spent all this time trying to not go to the dark side, all this time and effort and energy, and he overcame the dark side. But now, in order to hold this planet in balance, he's going to have to be in like a dark side meditation for the rest of his life. But he's willing to do it. He's willing to sacrifice himself so the rest of the galaxy can live. One question I had though is that like even if the nameless were actually animals like we were previously led to believe, I feel like that's still like really bad. Like that's still bad enough that it makes sense why this was like a great sin that occurred against a whole species. That was just kind of like a side thought that I had, which is I don't think that they have to be people for this to be like really, really messed up what happened to them. But them turning out to be people, it does kind of add another layer onto it. And thankfully, Vernestra does actually end up getting to use her special knowledge that she got from Mari Santeca because Tarek was able to tell Sarah that they were crashing through their psychic force bond. And so on Coruscant, they knew that they crash landed. And so the next group was already on their way. And Vernestra was able to navigate them to the planet through all of the dangerous atmospheric conditions of that planet because of the information that she got from Mari Santeca. So I was really glad that this still ended up being something that was necessary because I was kind of bummed out when it seemed like that whole thing was going to be for nothing. So thankfully, Vernestra still gets to use that. Everybody lives happily ever after. Marchion Rowe goes into solitary confinement forever until he dies of natural causes, so that's cool. We do have Gira Staros. She thought that she got away with the whole thing. However, once she returns to the Republic, she finds out that Avon has faked her own death so she wouldn't have to talk to Gira anymore. And that makes Gira feel pretty crappy. So in the end, Gira didn't truly fully get away with it. Lena So is still Chancellor, but she is very wary of trusting the Jedi like that again, which understandable, honestly. Like I know that this later leads to the downfall of the Jedi, but I mean, I think we can all agree that nothing good comes from the Jedi and the Chancellor being that close and working together all the time. So I get why she is pretty much being like, I don't want to ever do that again. But of course, we know that they are going to end up doing that again. Aslan Rel is able to leave Planet X. He doesn't leave with everybody else. He actually leaves in Barnabas Vim's ship. So that is a Claudia Gray character from Phase 2. And Barnabas's ship was still on Planet X. And so Aslan finds that and leaves in that. And he goes off on his own. While he is on that ship, something that happens is he gets a hold of an old lightsaber and he bleeds the Kyber crystal. So that's pretty much a signal to us that Aslan Rel has made the decision to go full Sith as a result of the events in this book. And it's hard to say if it truly is only the events of this book that finally pushed him over the edge or if he pretty much just already made that decision a long time ago and his mind was just never gonna actually change. But we do get a confirmation that Aslan Rel is going full Sith now. So it sounds like he is part of that lineage that eventually leads to Palpatine in the prequel era. We do also know that Reith is planning to continue to look for Aslan. So I wonder if that's something that we're going to come across in other Star Wars books if we're ever going to hear about that again, because it does feel like Reith's story was left kind of open-ended. If Reith ever popped up in anything else, I definitely would be very pleasantly surprised because I really, really love Reith. There's also a big celebration at the Jedi Temple. The Nihil are defeated, very Return of the Jedi feeling, and life goes on. Buryaga is at the Jedi Temple, so is Belle Zettifar. The two of them are really at peace with being good Jedi now. Belle has finally been able to put the past behind him. Buryaga is very at peace with being a good Jedi and they're ready to just move forward with their lives. We also do see Yoda is troubled by keeping the nameless secret and trying to not let that story go down in history as much as possible, but or at least, the truth of what happened on Planet X. Yoda also believes that keeping it hidden is 100% necessary. I think it's up to the reader to decide if that's true or not. I mean, I definitely agree that Planet X needs to be hidden from the galaxy because it's just way too high stakes. It's way too dangerous. But as far as the nameless themselves, I mean, it does kind of lead to confusion later when it comes to the Force prophecy in the prequel era. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm decided on exactly how I feel about Yoda keeping it secret. But that's where we leave off for Trials of the Jedi. I really was very happy with a lot of the characters' storylines that I was really invested in, especially Belle Zettifar and Porter Ingle. I think those were the two most satisfying endings for me. I would say Vernestra, I was kind of a little worried about, especially when it seemed like she wasn't going to get to use her information. Reef being open ended, that could end up being a good thing for me or a disappointing thing for me. I don't know. I feel like it could go either way. I also did like that we got a confirmation about the development of the Sith and kind of like how that comes about at the end of the High Republic. I mean, we didn't get a whole lot of information on that, which I wasn't expecting a lot of information, but I was glad that we got to see Aslan bleed the crystal. I mean, that's as much of a confirmation as you can get of him being a Sith. I was not happy with the way that Ghira's story ended because I really wanted her to face more consequences, but I mean, at least the most important thing to her, which was winning her daughter back, she did not succeed in that. So I at least found comfort in that aspect. But overall, I feel like Charles Soule did a really good job of wrapping up all of these questions that we were started off the book with. And I was really happy to see how these characters' storylines ended up, especially because, I've been waiting for so long. So the anticipation was high. And I really feel like I'm happy with how most of it turned out. So let me know in the comments how you feel about how the High Republic went. Did you enjoy the series as a whole? Did you have your highs and lows? What worked for you and what didn't? And thanks so much for joining, y'all. I hope that y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.